Hi, how you doing? This is the Gamertron and welcome back to the Gamertron Show. I have played a lot of video games, and I mean a lot of video games. So a video game has to do something really unique and somewhat different to really make it stand out in my collection. And the newly released AAA video game from Ubisoft, The Division, has really caught my interest. Now, if you've watched my previous videos on The Division, you know I like The Division. While the game does contain some aspects I'm not too fond of, and this being an Ubisoft game, it does have some technical issues, overall, The Division has many features and a ton of content that fascinates me and I've slowly fallen in love with. For instance, one of the most unique, and I'm surprised not more people have praised and talked about this, is the open world environment and the seamless transition of progressing and exploring this open world. You see, there are almost no loading screens in The Division. The only times you will ever encounter a loading screen is when you first boot up the game and you're first loading in, or when you're fast traveling. Those are the only times you will encounter loading screens. In other open world video games like Fallout 4 and The Witcher 3, there are loading screens when transitioning from one area to another. Not the case in The Division. You can go anywhere and everywhere in this open world. You can go inside buildings, access story missions, go into story mission areas, leave the story mission areas, back into the regular open world. You can transition between all these locations within the open world completely seamlessly. It's really quite incredible. I don't think there's ever been a single open world video game where I haven't encountered a single load screen when transitioning from certain areas or accessing certain missions. In The Division, traveling this open world, activating missions, and moving from smaller controlled linear environments to the wide open environments, just all that without any loading screens. Even though there was, let's admit it, there was a graphical downgrade with The Division, with what was shown at E3 years ago, The Division is still a technical marvel. I mean, visually, the game still looks gorgeous with textures and lighting, and especially the environmental detail. But on a technical and mechanical base level, The Division supports some very impressive features in terms of its open world. I mean, you don't have to access a menu or anything to launch and get into PvP. You just have to travel to a certain part of the open world and access this certain part of the open world that is open to all players, where you can actually interact and fight other players. There is no denying that the open world of The Division and how the PvE and PvP and all the areas, the way everything is interconnected without the need for loading screens. It's impressive. It's impressive to say the least. I've never seen a game like The Division do anything like this, and it is something to be applauded for. And while that portion of the game, the open world, I absolutely adore about this game, there are other parts about this game that just are very awkward in a sense. And I think you guys have an idea of what I'm talking about, and that's the juxtaposition on the style of game that this is, and the actual setting and world this game takes place in. The game plays like a third-person shooter RPG grinding for loot kind of game, like Diablo, like Borderlands, like Destiny. A kind of genre and gameplay style that is more suited towards fantasy and science fiction games. But The Division's setting, world, and story takes place within a present-day, modern military setting that's slightly in the future with slightly high-tech gear. This isn't full-blown science fiction. It has some science fiction elements, like automatic sentry turrets, an extremely intelligent AI assistant, advanced medical technology that somehow heals wounds in the middle of battle, things like that are kind of set in the realm of science fiction. But besides those things, The Division is mostly set in a realistic, modern-day setting with a bit of a post-apocalypse twist. Seeing damage numbers fly off enemies, having them drop different varieties and rarities of gear and loot, leveling up and focusing on stats. It's just not something you're accustomed to with a game with this kind of setting. It's understandable and expected in science fiction RPGs and fantasy RPGs, not modern military. On a side note, I know The Division isn't exactly a modern military game. That is just the best term I have at my disposal for describing this kind of setting. Continuing on though, When it comes to this kind of setting, the general consumer and gamer is used to this kind of setting being used for an action-adventure shooter. And when this game was first advertised, people expected and assumed that The Division would be an open-world shooter, an open-world multiplayer shooter. No one was expecting all of these RPG mechanics. So when more of the final version of The Division was revealed and shown, people were, of course, skeptical. And I have to admit, even in the final version of The Division, the setting of the world and the design of the characters just don't always look right or feel right when it comes to the actual gameplay and all the role-playing mechanics surrounding it. It's a very odd and very fascinating combination. And while personally I admit I prefer these kind of RPG style of games to be more focused in the genre of science fiction and fantasy, because it is off-putting, it is jarring seeing these human enemies that don't have superpowers or force fields or magic protecting their bodies from bullets. Just seeing an entire clip of ammunition get unloaded into an enemy's head, seeing a health bar go down and numbers come flying out. It definitely looks odd in a game with this kind of setting. It definitely looks odd. I'm completely used to and fine with it in fantasy and sci-fi RPGs, but in this game it's very jarring. But like I said previously, it's also fascinating. It's fascinating to see Ubisoft. It's fascinating to see the developers of this game take such a risk with combining these gameplay elements and this setting and just merging the two to create this very unique and odd hybrid. And while I still stand by that it is off-putting, it is by no means an actual negative. I wouldn't call it a detriment to the game. I would just call it something that makes the game unique and may not appeal to everyone. However, I gotta admit, the gameplay that is present within The Division, the actual third-person shooting, and the RPG mechanics and features built around that are well made. The game finds a unique balance of clunky and smooth at the same time. It's very odd, very fascinating. It's the only word I can use. The Division is a fascinating game in so many of its aspects. Same thing can be applied to the actual multiplayer, the PvP, or in this case, what it's called, the Dark Zone. A huge chunk of the open world split off where players can actually encounter one another. It shows a lot of similarities to open world multiplayer survival games like DayZ, H1Z1. I think you guys have an idea of what I'm talking about when I describe that. But it also has this added MMO feel, with mobs of enemies and special bosses roaming around the different areas of the Dark Zone. And you can choose to work with or against other players in killing these NPCs, getting the loot, killing other players, taking their loot, or working together to both get the loot. It's a very unique experience and kind of one of a kind. The Division itself is a one-of-a-kind game. Is it going to be for everyone? No, not at all. This game will not appeal to everyone. But even if it doesn't appeal to you, I think it's hard to not admit that The Division is a very fascinating game. It's fascinating to look at this game, to deconstruct it, to look at all its different moving parts and how they work together. The Division is a video game that's going to keep my interest and have me interested in all its assets for quite some time. But what are your thoughts on The Division? What are your thoughts on The Division's unique mechanics and features? Let me know your thoughts, feelings, and opinions in the comment section below. I love reading comments. I get nearly enough comments. Please leave a comment. If you liked the video in any way, shape, or form, please hit the like button. Hitting the like button helps you, helps me, helps everybody involved with the video if you hit the like button. If you want to support me directly and help me out and help the channel out, then please share the video on social media, Twitter and Facebook. And if you want to support me directly, then please consider pledging and becoming a patron of my Patreon. Anyways, guys, that's been a video, and I will see you all later.